When her daughter walked out the door, Eleanor was left with 3 children and no goodbye. The house sat quiet, too quiet for a place with little ones inside. A modest wooden home in the outskirts of a fading southern town, paint peeling, porch sagging, and a mailbox leaning just slightly, like it too had grown tired. Eleanor stood by the window, one arm wrapped around Rosie, the youngest, who clung to her neck like ivy. The sun was low, casting long shadows on the dirt road where her daughter's car had disappeared minutes ago. Dust still hung in the air, as if even the earth wasn't ready to accept the silence she left behind. No note, no promise to return, just a slammed door and the sound of tires rolling away. Lily, the eldest at 11, sat on the front steps, legs crossed, eyes scanning the road with a maturity she hadn't earned. Sammy, 8, kicked at a pile of gravel with restless shoes, sniffing hard, refusing to cry. He had his mother's stubbornness, Eleanor thought, and her ability to vanish when things got too hard. Eleanor's body was not made for starting over. At 62, her back ached from years of quiet labor, nursing others, cleaning homes, folding clothes not her own. Her hands, strong but worn, held Rosie a little tighter. From the window, she could see neighbors standing in their yards, pretending to water flowers that didn't need watering, pretending not to notice. But they saw. They all saw. And still, no one came. The air inside the house grew heavier by the second. Eleanor turned away from the window and walked slowly to the kitchen. The floor creaked beneath her feet. A pot of coffee, weak and half warm, sat untouched on the stove. There was no one to drink it but her. She placed Rosie gently on a chair and opened the fridge. Half a loaf of bread, a few eggs, the end of a jar of peanut butter. She closed it without a word. In the quiet, Rosie looked up. "Grandma, where's Mama?" Eleanor paused. The question struck harder than the silence that followed. She looked at the child's eyes, round, trusting, waiting. "She had to go," Eleanor said softly. "Will she come back?" Eleanor didn't answer. She just kissed Rosie's forehead and walked away. Back at the window, the dust had settled. The road was still. The neighbors had gone back inside. And Eleanor understood something in that moment. No one was coming. Not her daughter, not her sister, not the neighbors with their quiet stares and polite distance. Just her and the children. As Rosie's breathing steadied behind her, Eleanor reached for the curtain, pulled it closed, and whispered to no one in particular, "I guess it's just us now." The morning light spilled through the kitchen window, dull and gray, settling over the worn tile like dust. Eleanor moved slowly, her slippers whispering against the linoleum as she placed 4 chipped plates on the table, then 3 mismatched cups, and finally 4 chairs, each one pulled out, waiting. She didn't know why she set the table like that. Habit, maybe, or hope, or something quieter than both. Rosie, still half asleep, rubbed her eyes and climbed into the chair closest to Eleanor. Lily was already dressed in her school clothes, though there was no school anymore, not since her mother left. Sammy trailed in last, dragging his feet, shoulders hunched, his face already set in a scowl he didn't understand. Eleanor poured hot water over stale tea bags, the last of them. She handed one to Lily, one to Sammy. Rosie got warm milk, what little was left. They sat in silence for a while, the 4 of them, surrounded by the sound of the refrigerator humming and the faint ticking of the clock above the stove. No one said what they were all thinking. Lily was the first to break. "Is Mama coming back today?" Eleanor didn't look up. She folded a cloth slowly and placed it on her lap, smoothing it with her fingers. "No, baby," she said softly. "Not today." Sammy pushed his cup away. "You always say that. You don't know." Eleanor didn't argue. Arguing with children about their mother's absence didn't change the fact of it. Lily leaned forward, voice quieter. But she might, right? Eleanor's hands stilled. She looked at the girl, at the soft brown face already carrying too much weight. She might, Eleanor said, but we can't wait on what might. That was all she said. That was all there was to say. The rest of the morning passed in chores. Eleanor sorted laundry while Rosie colored on torn printer paper. Lily swept the front porch without being asked. Sammy stayed in his room, lying face down on the bed, clutching a photo he wouldn't show anyone. Around noon, the sun broke through, casting hard light over everything Eleanor wanted to hide. The peeling paint near the windowsill, the crack in the ceiling, the stack of unopened mail on the hallway table. She picked it up. Bills, overdue notices, one red envelope with final notice stamped in the corner. She set them down, unopened. By late afternoon, the children were in the backyard. Rosie picking flowers, Lily trying to teach Sammy how to throw a baseball. Eleanor sat in the living room, her feet up, head resting against the back of the chair. Her eyes closed, but not for long. The doorbell rang. Sharp. Twice. She rose slowly, heart tapping against her ribs. For a second, foolishly she thought, maybe she opened the door. It wasn't help. A man in a polo shirt and clipboard stood on the porch. His name tag read Gulf Utilities. He didn't smile. "Ma'am, I'm here about the balance on your account. This is your third notice." Eleanor nodded. "I know." He looked down at the clipboard. "If payment isn't made by the 15th, services will be disconnected." She didn't answer, just nodded again. He paused, as if waiting for her to cry, plead, explain. When she didn't, he shifted uncomfortably. "All right then," he said. "Have a good day." He turned and walked away. She stood in the doorway, watching him go, watching the street empty again. She closed the door, gently, and when she turned back toward the kitchen, she saw the chairs. 4 of them, one for each of them and not a single one for help. Eleanor dialed the number slowly, as if pressing gently could soften what she already expected. Her thumb hesitated over the final digit before she pressed it. The line rang twice, then a click. "Margaret speaking," came the voice. Polished, sharp, familiar. "Hey," Eleanor said, voice quiet. "It's me." A pause, just enough to sting. "I figured," Margaret answered. "Didn't recognize the number. Thought it might be a telemarketer." Eleanor tried to smile, but nothing moved. "I just wanted to talk, maybe, see if you had time." More silence. Then, "Eleanor, I'm in the middle of something right now. If this is about her, your daughter, I can't help you." "It's not about her," Eleanor said, though of course it was. "It's about the kids. I could use just a little help." Margaret exhaled, loud enough to make a point. "Ellie, I told you before. You shouldn't have let it get this far. You always made excuses for her. Now look. Left you with 3 kids and nothing to show for it." Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened. She pressed her thumb to the chipped wood of the armrest. "They're not the problem," she said softly. "No," Margaret replied. "You are." Eleanor blinked. She didn't cry. Not now. Not for Margaret. "You've always let people lean on you until you couldn't stand up straight. You want my advice?" Margaret continued. "Give those kids to someone who can handle them. Foster care, adoption, I don't know. You're not well, Ellie. You're tired, and frankly, this isn't your burden." "It is now," Eleanor said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Well, don't come running to me when it falls apart," Margaret snapped. "Some of us have lives to manage." Then the line went dead. Eleanor stared at the phone in her hand for a long while, long after the call had ended. The living room sat dim around her. The television hummed in the corner. Some news story she wasn't watching, Faces flickered across the screen, voices murmuring about a world that didn't seem to include her anymore. She set the phone down, quietly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might crack the stillness that surrounded her now. In the hallway, a shadow moved. "Lily," she called out. No answer. She stood, knees stiff, and walked slowly down the hall. The children's room door was slightly ajar. Inside, Lily sat on the edge of the bed, arms wrapped around her legs, chin pressed to her knees. Her face was turned toward the window, but she wasn't looking outside. Eleanor stepped in gently. "Baby, you okay?" Lily didn't move. "I heard what she said." Eleanor's heart sank. "She doesn't know us," she said. "She's not here. She doesn't understand." Lily turned, eyes full but steady. "She said we're not your problem." Eleanor knelt down, bones creaking with age and weight. "You're not a problem," she said, voice thick. "You're mine. That means I don't run when things get hard. That means I stay." Lily blinked. "But what if we're too much?" "You're not," Eleanor whispered. "You're everything." Lily nodded, but her face stayed tired. Eleanor stayed on the floor with her for a while, listening to the wind outside, to Rosie's soft voice in the other room, to Sammy dribbling a ball against the wall. Eventually, Lily spoke again. "Do you think she's ever coming back?" Eleanor closed her eyes. "I don't know, baby," she said. "But I do know this. We're still here. Together." She rose slowly, kissed Lily's forehead, and stepped out, closing the door behind her. Back in the living room, the television still played. The clock still ticked. The bills still sat unopened. But somewhere down that hall, a little girl was trying not to cry where no one could hear her. And Eleanor, strong, tired, alone, was learning that silence had a weight, one that could either crush her or make her stronger. She wasn't sure yet which one it would be. The fever started in the middle of the night. Rosie was shivering under the covers, her small body damp with sweat, her breath shallow and quick. Eleanor woke to the sound of coughing, sharp, dry, relentless, and within seconds she was at the girl's side, pressing the back of her hand to her forehead. Too hot. "Lily," she called out, "get me a cold towel, quick." Lily appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her oversized hoodie, eyes alert. Sammy stirred behind her. "Is she okay?" he asked. "No, baby. Go back to bed," Eleanor said, softer than she felt. She held Rosie close, whispering nonsense words, a prayer maybe, or just the kind of comfort a child doesn't question. But Rosie didn't respond. Her eyes fluttered open and closed, unfocused, her lips cracked and dry. The nearest hospital was across town. No car, no one to call. Eleanor wrapped Rosie in a blanket, pulled on her coat, and took Lily's hand. "You're coming with me," she said. "Sammy, stay here. Lock the door after we leave. Don't open it for anyone." Sammy looked scared but nodded. They waited at the bus stop for 30 minutes in the cold, Rosie half conscious in Eleanor's arms. By the time they reached the public clinic, the line was already stretching out the door. Inside, the waiting room was loud, full, and too bright. Eleanor signed in at the desk. The receptionist didn't look up. "How long?" Eleanor asked. "Could be a few hours," the woman said. "Maybe more." "She's burning up," Eleanor whispered. "She's 5. She hasn't said a word since last night." The woman looked up briefly, then shrugged. "Sit tight, they'll call you." They found a seat near the back. Rosie whimpered once, then fell into a kind of stillness that scared Eleanor more than the crying had. Time passed in slow, aching silence. Lily sat close, one hand on Rosie's back. Eleanor watched the clock. 1 hour, 2. Finally, a nurse stepped into the room. "Rosie Hill?" Eleanor stood fast, knees stiff, arms numb. They were taken to a small examination room where the nurse barely made eye contact. She asked the routine questions: name, symptoms, any known allergies, typing without listening. The doctor entered 5 minutes later, young, hurried, with a badge clipped to a too-clean coat. He glanced at Rosie, took her temperature, listened to her breathing, and frowned. "She's dehydrated, fever's high. Could be flu, maybe RSV," he said. "We'll monitor her for a bit. Might need fluids." Eleanor nodded, standing by helpless. The doctor paused, looking between Eleanor and Lily. "Where are her parents?" Eleanor hesitated. The words felt like a test she wasn't prepared for. "I'm her grandmother," she said. "Any legal guardianship paperwork?" "No." He sighed. "We'll do what we can, but if she needs to be admitted, we'll have to speak to Child Services." The room went still. Lily looked at Eleanor, fear rising in her face. Eleanor said nothing. She didn't argue, didn't beg. Just stared at the wall as the doctor left, already moving on to the next patient. When the nurse returned with a small bag of fluids and a needle, Rosie stirred again, eyes opening slightly. "Grandma," she whispered, weak as a breath. "I'm here, baby," Eleanor said, sitting beside her, pressing her lips to her burning temple. "I'm not going anywhere." The nurse inserted the IV with practiced hands. Rosie winced, but didn't cry. Lily looked down, her small fists clenched in her lap. "Are they going to take her?" she asked. Eleanor looked at her, really looked. "No one's taking any of you," she said. "Not while I'm breathing." And for the first time that day she believed herself, even in a room where no one saw her, even when the world treated her like a shadow. Something had changed, not the fever, not the fear, but her. The house was quiet again. Rosie was home, sleeping in her bed, cheeks still flushed but no longer burning. The doctor had cleared her after a day of fluids and rest. They'd sent her home with syrup and warnings and a paper Eleanor didn't fully understand, but signed anyway. Sammy had stopped asking questions. Lily had stopped pretending not to have them. The night stretched long and Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat at the edge of her bed, the lamp beside her casting soft light across the small room. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus from the rub she'd used on Rosie's chest. On a whim, or maybe something deeper, she pulled open the drawer of her nightstand and reached to the back, where an old shoebox lay wrapped in a scarf. She hadn't touched it in years. The box creaked slightly as she opened it, the cardboard dry with age. Inside were fragments of a life, hospital bracelets, faded school photos, a tiny sock with a worn-out heel, and letters, some written, some never sent, and photos. There was one of her daughter at 17, eyes fierce and distant, hair long, lips tight. Eleanor had taken it one morning after church, when she still believed things would get better. Before the yelling, before the leaving, before she had started coming home late and smelling like liquor and something heavier, she pulled out another photo, a birthday party. Cake smeared across her daughter's cheeks, Sammy in her arms, a baby then. Lily barely walking. She stared at the picture for a long time. There had been love, once, but there had also been warnings. Missed school, missed shifts, broken promises. Nights when Eleanor sat by the window, waiting for headlights that never appeared. She had always covered for her, paid the bills when they weren't paid, watched the children without asking questions. And each time, she had told herself, she's just struggling, she'll find her way. But maybe she never wanted to. Maybe she saw motherhood as something to outrun, not grow into. Eleanor pulled out a folded paper tucked between two photos. A note, barely a sentence, scribbled in her daughter's handwriting. Don't wait up. No date, no explanation, just that. She had found it once after a long night. Her daughter had come home at dawn, eyes red, voice cold. That had been years ago, and still, Eleanor had waited up. Every time, she felt a sudden pressure in her chest. Not sorrow, not quite anger. Something heavier, something like shame. She had spent so long pretending her daughter was someone she could still reach, someone who would come back and be the mother those children deserved. But she hadn't. And the truth sat heavy in her hands now, in photographs and silence, and the shadow of a girl who had chosen to disappear. "I should have seen this coming," Eleanor said aloud. The room didn't answer. She placed the photos back carefully, one by one. But the note, that stayed out. She set it beside the lamp in full view, a reminder, not of her failure, but of the moment she'd finally stopped pretending. Outside, the wind picked up. The branches tapped gently against the windowsill. Eleanor leaned back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her hands crossed on her chest. She wasn't sure when her daughter had turned into someone she no longer knew. But now, finally, she was ready to stop waiting at the window. The screen door creaked open as Eleanor stepped out onto the porch, a dish towel still in her hand. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the lawn, warming the wooden boards beneath her feet. Rosie and Sammy played near the edge of the yard, chasing dandelions, tossing a ball back and forth, laughing in bursts that made the quiet almost bearable. Lily sat on the steps, chin resting in her hands, her sketchbook open but untouched. Across the street, two women stood by a mailbox. One held a leash attached to a small white dog. The other shaded her eyes with one hand, pretending to look at the clouds. They weren't fooling anyone. Eleanor knew what came next. She didn't need to hear the words to know them, but today, they didn't bother hiding their voices. "It's a shame, really," one said. "3 of them on her own. I heard the mom's on drugs, ran off somewhere. Probably not the first time." The dog barked. The leash was tugged. She shouldn't be keeping them. They need real stability, not someone that old, living off whatever she can scrape together. A laugh, dry and sharp. "God knows the system would do better." Eleanor's spine stayed straight. Her face remained still, but something tightened in her chest, not for herself, but for the small ears only a few steps away. Lily closed her sketchbook slowly. "They think we're a burden," she said. The words hung in the air, heavier than the heat. Eleanor stepped down beside her, lowering herself with quiet effort. Her knees cracked as she sat. "I know what they think," she said, "but that doesn't make it true." "They look at us like we're some broken thing," Lily whispered. Eleanor looked at her granddaughter. The girl's face was calm, but her eyes were far too old. "Baby," Eleanor said, "you don't let people tell you who you are. Not with words, not with looks. They don't see us, not really. They just see what's easier for them to believe." Lily didn't answer right away. She pulled at the sleeve of her sweater. "But what if they're right?" she asked. "What if we are too much?" Eleanor turned toward her, her voice low and steady. "You are not too much. Not you, not Sammy, not Rosie. You're mine, and I'm not ashamed of that." The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of cut grass and summer dust. The two women across the street walked away, their gossip trailing behind them like perfume. Eleanor reached for Lily's hand. "You listen to me," she said. "We don't get to choose what people think. We only get to choose what we do. And I'm choosing you, every single day." Lily nodded, but the sadness didn't leave her eyes. They sat there for a while, just watching the light move across the street. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Eleanor stood at the kitchen sink, staring out into the darkness beyond the window. The glass reflected her face, older than it used to be, more tired but not weak. She remembered a time when neighbors brought over casseroles during illness, when church ladies left fresh bread at the doorstep, when folks checked in just because. That time was gone. She was no one's charity case, and she wouldn't beg to be seen, but she also wouldn't forget. People had watched her carry the weight and looked away, heard the struggle, and closed their doors. And when the reckoning came, as she now believed it would, they wouldn't be able to say they didn't know. They knew. They just didn't care. The knock came in the early evening, hard, deliberate, too familiar. Eleanor dried her hands and moved toward the door, her body already stiffening before she reached it. She didn't need to look through the curtain. She knew who it was. She opened the door slowly. Margaret stood there in full makeup and a pressed blouse, her mouth already tight with judgment. Behind her, the sun hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over her pearl earrings and patent leather purse. "Well," Margaret said, "you look tired." Eleanor said nothing. She stepped aside. Inside, the air grew thick. Margaret looked around the room with the kind of face people wear at funerals, polite, distant, superior. She didn't sit, just stood there, one hand still gripping her purse, like she might bolt if the couch looked too worn. "I was in the area," she said. "Figured I'd stop in, see how things were going." Eleanor crossed her arms. "You don't stop in. You never have." Margaret exhaled through her nose. "Fine. I came because I'm concerned." "About what?" "About them," Margaret said, gesturing vaguely toward the hallway where the children were. "You're not young, Eleanor. You can barely keep up. And I'm hearing things from neighbors, from people at church." Eleanor didn't flinch. "They all have plenty to say," she replied. "None of them come through the door." Margaret's mouth twisted into something like pity. "I know you think you're doing what's right, but this isn't sustainable. You can't give them what they need." Eleanor took a slow breath. "What is it you think they need, Margaret?" Margaret shifted her purse from one arm to the other. "Structure, stability, a proper home. They need parents, Eleanor. Not a tired old woman with nothing to offer but pride." That word, pride, landed hard. Eleanor stepped closer. "They need love, safety. To know someone won't leave them behind. I've given them that." Margaret's voice sharpened. "You're being selfish." Eleanor blinked. "Selfish? You're clinging to something you can't handle. You think love is enough, but love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't get them health insurance or a decent education or a real future." "They're not yours to decide for," Eleanor said quietly. "No," Margaret snapped. "But neither are they yours by right. You don't have custody. You're not their mother. And if something happens to you, God forbid, what happens to them then?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Then they'll still be loved, and that's more than I can say for what they had before." Margaret took a breath, as if reining herself in. "I spoke to someone, a caseworker. She said there are options: foster placement, guardianship transfer. You could still be involved, but they'd be in a better position. You should consider it." Eleanor stared at her sister for a long time. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of Lily reading to Rosie in the other room. "I see," Eleanor said finally. "You came here not to help, but to remove them." Margaret folded her arms. "I came to protect them from what's coming." Eleanor stepped forward. "You don't protect children by abandoning them. You don't save them by handing them over to strangers. And you sure as hell don't walk into my house and act like I haven't been the one keeping them fed, clothed, and loved while everyone else just disappeared." Margaret shook her head. "This is going to fall apart. You're going to fail." Eleanor didn't raise her voice. Instead, she stepped even closer, close enough that Margaret had to look her in the eye. "Over my dead body," Eleanor said, steady as stone. For a moment, neither moved. Then Margaret turned sharply, walking toward the door without another word. She paused on the threshold, as if expecting Eleanor to call her back. Eleanor didn't. When the door closed behind her, Eleanor stood in the center of the room, her breath shallow, her hands trembling just slightly. But her heart, solid, unmoving. The house was still. Too late for cartoons, too early for morning light. Just the soft hum of silence, the kind that only visits when children are finally asleep and the world has no more to demand for the day. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, a single candle burning beside her. Not for mood, but because the electricity was unpredictable these days. She stared at a blank sheet of paper. Her hands were folded. Her mind wasn't. Margaret's voice echoed in her head like an old hymn sung off-key. You can't handle this. It's going to fall apart. But Eleanor had handled more than this. A cheating husband, an empty bank account, a daughter who'd walked out on her own children without a second glance. What she'd never done was plan for war. And that's what this was now. A quiet war. Not with fists or shouting, but with paperwork, appointments, signatures, and strength that didn't show on the outside. She pulled the paper toward her and began to write. Not to Margaret, not to the children, to someone who would matter when the time came, to whom it may concern. If anything happens to me, I want it known that I have been the sole caregiver for my 3 grandchildren, Lily Hill, Samuel Hill, and Rosie Hill. Their mother, my daughter, abandoned them without notice. There has been no contact, no financial support, and no intention to return. I am aware I do not have legal custody, but I am their grandmother. I have raised them, protected them, loved them. This house is their home. I will not let them be taken from it without a fight. Please contact Pastor Arthur Johnson of St. Luke's Baptist Church for confirmation of character and guardianship support. He has known our family for years. This letter is not just for legal protection. It is a promise. If I can't be here to protect them, let this stand as proof that I tried. With everything I had. Eleanor Hill. She signed her name slowly, the pen trembling slightly in her hand. She folded the paper into thirds, placed it in an envelope, and wrote, in case of emergency, in careful block letters. She rose and walked to her room. The house creaked softly under her steps. She lifted the corner of her mattress and slid the envelope beneath it, right where she kept the last of the emergency cash, a photo of her mother, and a folded church bulletin from 5 Easters ago. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. The next morning, Eleanor called Pastor Johnson. I need to talk, she said simply. He didn't ask why, just said, come when you're ready. She hung up and watched Lily help Rosie with her shoes. Sammy was still in his room, humming low to himself, lining up toy soldiers in quiet, determined rows. They didn't know the system was circling. They didn't know their aunt had tried to sign their lives away like a bad check. They just knew breakfast was coming. Eleanor looked at them and made a vow she didn't say aloud. No one is taking you, not while I'm still breathing, and not even after. Pastor Johnson's church sat at the end of a quiet road, flanked by oak trees and the remains of what used to be a grocery store. The paint on the steeple peeled in long strips, and the bell hadn't rung in years, but the building stood with a kind of dignity, like it belonged to time itself. Eleanor arrived just after sunrise. The sanctuary was empty. Wooden pews lined both sides of the aisle, worn soft by decades of prayer. Dust danced in the light pouring through stained glass. The silence was gentle, not heavy, like the one in her home. Pastor Johnson was already there, seated near the front, reading from a small leather-bound Bible. He looked up and smiled when she entered. I was wondering when you'd come, he said. I almost didn't, Eleanor replied. He motioned for her to sit. No pulpit, no preaching, just two old souls on a wooden bench. For a long time, she didn't speak. Neither did he. Then quietly she said, "They want to take them." Pastor Johnson didn't ask who they were. He knew. Folks always had a way of showing up late once the hard part was over, or worse, when they thought it was time to claim what they hadn't earned. "She came to my house," Eleanor continued, "told me I'm too old, too tired, too poor. Said the state could do better." He nodded slowly. "And what do you believe?" Eleanor's hands rested in her lap. She looked at them, veined, calloused, brown and weathered from decades of quiet labor. "I believe I'm the only one who stayed," she said. "That's got to count for something." "It does," he said. "More than most things." She shook her head. "But the law doesn't care about tired women doing their best. It cares about paperwork." "Then we get you some paperwork," he said simply. She turned to him. "It's not that easy." "No," he said, "but it's not impossible. I'll help. I've got people who know people. We'll get you connected to someone who can walk you through it. It'll take time, but we'll do it right." Eleanor exhaled, slow and quiet. "Why would you help me?" she asked. He looked at her gently. "Because you didn't give up. That means something." She stared at the stained glass window across the aisle, a soft figure of a shepherd holding a lamb. Faded colors, cracked corners, still standing. "Sometimes I think I have given up," she said. "Just not all the way." He smiled. "That's what surviving feels like." They sat in silence again. It was the kind of silence Eleanor hadn't known in a long time. The kind that made space for breath, not sorrow. When she stood to leave, Pastor Johnson touched her hand briefly. "You're not alone," he said. Eleanor didn't cry, not here. But later that night, when she sat by the window and watched the children sleeping, Lily with one hand stretched across the bed, Sammy curled tight under a blanket, Rosie clutching her stuffed bear. She let her chest rise and fall without holding her breath. She looked out at the stars, and for the first time in months her thoughts didn't race. She would still have to fight. But now she had someone standing behind her. Not to carry the weight, but to remind her that she wasn't carrying it for nothing. It was just after 5 in the evening when the knock came. Not timid, not frantic, just a single flat rhythm, as if whoever stood on the other side believed they still had a right to be there. Eleanor had just taken cornbread out of the oven. The house was filled with the smell of baked beans and roasted vegetables. Lily was at the table helping Rosie with homework. Sammy sat on the floor, sketching dinosaurs in an old notebook. She wiped her hands on a towel, moved to the door, and opened it. Rain was starting to fall, thin, steady, and gray. And there she stood, her daughter, hair longer now, face thinner. Eyes that still carried the same tired fire Eleanor remembered. She looked older, and yet not grown. A bag slung over one shoulder. Wet sleeves, chapped lips, and no smile. "Mama," she said. Eleanor didn't move. She didn't speak. She just watched. "I didn't know where else to go," her daughter said, shifting her weight. "Things got bad." Eleanor said nothing. "I know it's been a while, but I was hoping maybe I could just come in, just for a little while, just until I figure some things out." Behind her, the street was empty. The kind of empty that felt intentional. No neighbors watching, no cars passing, just the rain and the silence. Eleanor stepped slightly forward, still inside the threshold. "You left," she said. "I know. No call, no letter. You left your children with me and disappeared. I thought I was doing what was best," her daughter replied, eyes flickering. "No," Eleanor said calmly. "You were doing what was easy." The words hung between them like a curtain that would never lift again. Inside the house, Rosie laughed, that small, bright sound that only comes from children unaware of what stands at the door. Her daughter's eyes filled just slightly at the sound. "Are they okay?" she asked. "They're better than okay," Eleanor said. "They are safe. They are fed. They are learning how to trust again." Her daughter took a breath, maybe to argue, but Eleanor didn't let her. "You left me with chaos and silence, and I picked up every piece with these hands," she said, lifting them slightly, "without a single promise that you'd ever come back. And now you stand here like you're owed something." "I'm not trying to take them," her daughter said. "I just need a place to sleep, just a few nights." Eleanor looked at her, fully, as if seeing her for the first time, not as the child she raised, but as the woman she had become. And she made her decision, not with anger, not with rage, but with clarity. She stepped back, but only far enough to close the door. Her voice was low, final. "There's nothing here for you now." Then she shut it, gently, and turned the lock. Inside, Lily had stood up watching from the kitchen. "Was that?" Eleanor nodded. "She's not staying." Lily didn't smile, but she didn't cry either. "Do you want help with the plates?" she asked. "Yes, baby, thank you." They set the table together. 4 plates, 4 cups, 4 chairs, not one empty. And for the first time, Eleanor sat down without waiting for anyone else to arrive. The living room was warm, filled with the smell of lemon oil and fresh laundry. Rosie and Sammy were playing a board game on the rug, arguing softly over whose turn it was. Lily sat nearby, reading aloud from a library book, her voice calm and steady. It had taken months to reach this peace. The kitchen had a new curtain now. A second-hand table stood sturdy beneath the window. Eleanor had even planted 2 rose bushes out front, both beginning to bloom. So when the knock came that Saturday morning, again sharp, again familiar, Eleanor didn't flinch. She opened the door to find Margaret, flanked by 2 other relatives Eleanor hadn't seen in over a year. Cousins, a sister-in-law, all of them dressed like they were going to brunch after. Margaret smiled too wide. "Well?" she said. "Don't you look well?" Eleanor didn't answer. "We were just in the neighborhood," one of the cousins said. "Thought we'd drop in, say hello. Maybe catch up," Margaret added. "We heard things are looking up." Eleanor leaned against the doorframe. "Did you now?" "We heard the church helped you get things sorted," Margaret said. "Legal guardianship, a little support. I mean, we always knew you'd figure something out." Lily appeared behind Eleanor, quiet but present. Rosie peeked from the hallway. Sammy stayed seated but alert. Eleanor didn't invite them in. "You weren't interested when things were falling apart," she said plainly. "Why the sudden interest now that they're standing on their own 2 feet? Margaret's smile faltered, but not for long. "We're family," she said. "No," Eleanor replied. "Family doesn't leave you drowning and then show up when the floors are dry." A pause, a long one. One of the cousins tried to smooth things over. "We thought maybe we could help now. Spend time with the kids. Give you a little break." Eleanor stepped forward, just enough to make her presence felt. "I needed help when the lights were being shut off, when Rosie was in the hospital, when Sammy had his night terrors and Lily cried herself to sleep. You weren't here then." Margaret crossed her arms, her voice tightening. "You always were dramatic." "No," Eleanor said. "I was alone, and I survived it, without you." Another silence fell, heavier this time. Behind her, Lily spoke. "We're fine now," she said clearly. "We don't need anything." Rosie nodded, clutching Eleanor's leg. Sammy stayed quiet, but his eyes never left Margaret's face. Eleanor looked at the 3 women in front of her. Faces once so familiar, now just reflections of a family that had chosen convenience over compassion. You don't get to come back just because we made it without you." She didn't slam the door. She closed it slowly, deliberately, and locked it. Inside, the air felt lighter. Rosie tugged at Eleanor's sleeve. "Grandma?" "Yes, baby." "Are we really okay now?" Eleanor knelt to meet her eyes. "We're better than okay," she said. "We're whole." That night they ate dinner together at the table. The same 4 chairs, the same quiet joy. No empty seats, no apologies, no need for permission. The porch was quiet as the sun slipped beneath the trees. Eleanor sat in her usual spot, cardigan pulled over her shoulders, a warm mug of tea in her hands. The wooden boards creaked softly beneath the rocking chair, worn smooth by time and patience. The children were near. Lily was reading on the steps below, legs stretched out, pencil tucked behind one ear. Sammy sat with Rosie in the yard, showing her how to build a little fort out of twigs and stones. Their laughter drifted up in waves, light, free, untouched by the noise of the past. The world hadn't changed. Bills still came. The roof still leaked when it rained too hard. But the house stood. The children thrived. And Eleanor. Eleanor no longer waited by windows for people who didn't deserve to return. She had become her own answer. Pastor Johnson had helped her file the guardianship paperwork. A woman from the county office had visited twice, clipboard in hand, skeptical but fair. Eleanor had shown her everything, the routine, the schoolwork, the photos taped to the fridge. The woman left with a nod and the beginnings of respect. Eleanor didn't speak much about what had happened, not to the children, not to the neighbors, not even to herself. She didn't need to. She had spoken by staying, by showing up every morning to tie shoelaces, check temperatures, braid hair, by cooking meals, folding laundry, saying, "I love you," even when the world stayed silent. This was the kind of revenge she believed in. Not bitterness, not punishment, but growth, but peace, but joy. Slowly earned, deeply held, and unshakable. The front yard was small, but the rose bushes were blooming now, wild and strong, like they'd waited all their lives for someone to tend them. Rosie ran up the porch steps and climbed into Eleanor's lap without asking. "You're warm," she said, snuggling into the crook of Eleanor's arm. "So are you," Eleanor replied. Sammy flopped onto the steps beside Lily, and the 4 of them sat there like they belonged, because they did. Eleanor looked out at the sky, streaked orange and pink and fading to indigo. A long time ago, she would have spent this hour praying for something to change. Now she just gave thanks that it had. Not because someone saved her, but because she kept going when no one else did. And that was enough. If you've ever been left behind but found the strength to rise, share your story below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Your voice matters here.